right. So welcome everyone to session one of our 10-week What is Money course. So I'm really excited to go through this material with all of you. So I've been doing this course at UC Santa Cruz in the last quarter. I learned a lot from it, and I'm really excited to go through it and again in a not in a university setting, because the university is full of bad vibes. So I'm really excited to go through this again with you, right? So I've just done this whole thing. I learned some stuff from doing it the first time, and I'm gonna try to give you an even better version of it this time. So I'm gonna give you kind of a overview of the structure of the class, and then I want to open it up to kind of hear what y'all thought about the readings. So generally, I mean, the way it works is that, I have a lot to say. I could easily talk for the entire 90 minutes. I mean, this was two classes. So I've taken two classes from the other one and I've squished it into one, because partly y'all can read faster than the undergraduates can, and we don't have to fulfill our quota of class time and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so I have plenty to say, but I'm probably going to start each meeting just by seeing what y'all have to say, because because I want you to practice noticing things in the text and saying what you noticed. I'll talk a little bit more, not today, but in a later session, about noticing. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to say what you noticed, and you'll you just got to say something and it'll set me off, and then I'll talk for 30 minutes. So I'm not necessarily gonna decide, but I'm going to say I want to let you trigger me into saying something, and then I can rant at you for a little bit. So that's how I'm going to try to run the course. I mean, if you have nothing to say, then I'll just give you a lecture, but it's more fun if y'all kind of start by bringing me something, right? So as you're doing the reading, preparing for class, just kind of be thinking about that, what can I notice? If I had to just say an observation that I had about the text, what would it? And you don't have to worry about this being incredibly profound, right? It's part of what we're going to try to practice in this class is noticing the obvious stuff. This applies maybe more to undergraduates than to y'all, but one problem that students often have is thinking that two things are too obvious to point out, and then they don't notice them, and actually the obvious thing is what they needed to think about, right? So anyway, so don't feel that what you have to say is too obvious. I'd like you to come ready with some observations. So this week we're kind of setting up the problem. I gave you, there's a text on Aristotle, which is really the source for the mainstream view about money in Western thought, including both liberals and Marxists. Both have a view that is really ultimately derived from Aristotle. And then there's the I guess we could call this the minor view, which is the chartalist view. So kind of the mainstream view is the medalist view. The minor view is the chartalist view. And the chartalist view has always been there. It's always been a kind of rival to the medalist view, but it now has kind of come into prominence in our own moment with the rise of modern monetary theory, which I'm sure some of you know about from following me. Maybe that's why you're here. And really the difference between medalists and chartalists is a debate about a coin. And it's the question of whether the coin is money because of the silver or the gold inside the coin, or whether it's money because of the stamp on the coin, because of the state imbuing the coin with a character, right? So character is a Greek word meaning stamp. And so when you test someone's character, this is really a metaphor for coinage. Sorry, I'm going to mute everybody. Okay, great. So in this class, we're going to be trying to kind of destabilize this view. And I'm going to try to show you how the medalism versus chartalism debate is in some ways a false problem that is essentially trying to make, each side is saying something true, but they're trying to elevate this truth that they have to a complete theory of money, and it doesn't work for either one. And so what we're going to be exploring is a view that is more akin to that in the Perry Merling reading that I also assigned, which is about the inherent hierarchy of money. So Merling's presentation of this is kind of purely technical. He is showing you that there is a hierarchy of money in well, I mean, basically the idea that some money is more money than others, and that there is a sort of credit hierarchy. But what we're going to be kind of exploring is the idea of a social hierarchy. So I'm going to be showing you that money is an inherently hierarchical phenomenon at a technical level, but also at a social level, and that we really can't think about money without thinking about, well, social hierarchy and the production and reproduction of inequality, right? So I'm gonna try to show you inequality and the production and reproduction of inequality is the fundamental problem of money, and this is something that neither the medalist nor the chartalist views really gets at adequately. So we're going to try to escape from this problem that we're going to be setting up this week, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit once I get out of these intro remarks and I've heard kind of what you have to say. So then we're going to do 6 weeks, and we're going to do basically 3 2-week units. So in the textbook, if you pick up a textbook and you read what money is, it's probably going to tell you that money has 3 functions. That money is a means of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. Okay, and that it does all of these things. And so we are going to spend 2 weeks on each of these. So we're going to begin with unit of account, and we're going to be looking at the invention of interest-bearing debt in ancient Mesopotamia, in Bronze Age Mesopotamia. Then we're going to do a unit on means of exchange, and we're going to look at the cowrie shells, so the shell money of the Pacific, which is a very cool and interesting phenomenon. It's really puzzling. So part of the reason I put it in this class is because I wanted to try to figure it out, and I really learned. So I didn't really know what my view on it was going to be a couple months ago when I was teaching it at Santa Cruz, and I think we found some pretty interesting stuff. So I'm excited to share that with you. And then we're going to do 2 weeks on store of value, and we're going to look at the development of precious metal coinage in the ancient Mediterranean, which is obviously a topic very near and dear to my heart. We're not going to get too into the weeds of all of that, so it's going to be very brief. There's potentially, if you're interested in that and wanted to learn more about it, we could do another class that was just about the coins, but that would be sort of the level 2 class. So I'm going to try to show you in these 3 units that when we talk about the 3 functions of money, that we're really talking about 3 different things. That they are literally different things. They are different physical objects, and that it would have been kind of impossible for people in the ancient, in what I'm going to call the Ancient regime, by which I mean all monetary systems prior to the 19th century, prior to the development of modern monetary systems in the 19th century. It would have been quite difficult for people in the Ancient regime to be confused about money such that they thought that it was all the same thing, right? This is a modern confusion that it would have been very counterintuitive to people, because they not only were they different things, but they had different names, right? So there is an écu, which in medieval France, and that's a coin, but what you owe is livres. So you owe a debt in livres and you pay it in écus. They don't have the same name. Whereas in our world, you owe a debt in dollars and you pay it in dollars. We use the same name to describe different things, and this leads to our confusion. So we're going to be so once we've kind of examined all of these things individually, we're going to look at the modern monetary revolution, which is where the difference got disappeared in the Stalinist sense, right? I mean, it was made to vanish, and so we're gonna try to think about that, and then we're gonna kind of wrap up by trying to apply some of these lessons to our contemporary moment, to post 1970s America and the student debt stuff. So I taught this at the university, and the student debt thing was very relevant. It may be relevant to some of you as well, but we'll see when we get there. So anyway, so that's the overall trajectory of the class, right? We're gonna do Mesopotamia, we're gonna do the cowrie shells, we're gonna do the coins, and then we're gonna do modern European money. Those are kind of the four units. And again, sort of the thesis that I want to put on the table for you to consider is the idea that money is not identity, right? Money, we cannot understand money through the metaphysics of identity. I'll elaborate a little bit more on that in what's going to follow. And part of that is that money is not identical with itself, right? The different things that we call money are not all identical. Money is an ambiguous term that we use to refer to things that are different. And not only are they different, but they're in contradiction with one another, okay? So probably the most famous example of a contradiction of this kind is called Gresham's law, which is the statement that bad money drives out good. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the coins. But what is really being expressed by Gresham's law is the idea that there is a contradiction between means of exchange and store of value. What Gresham's law essentially says is that the better a money is as a store of value, the worse it will be as a means of exchange. Right? And we'll talk about the reasons for why that is, but perhaps you've already seen, I hope, my students at Santa Cruz they kept asking me about the Bitcoins. I hope that y'all maybe will not spend so much time asking me about the cryptocurrencies, okay? Because once you understand this basic point, it's quite trivial, right? If it's a good store of value, it's not a very good means of exchange or unit of account, right? Nobody wants to spend their Bitcoins on pizza because you'd feel really fucking stupid if you did 10 years later. Because if you think Bitcoin is a good thing, you're expecting it to appreciate in value. So you don't want to spend it. You want to hoard it. Similarly, if you believe in Bitcoin and your belief is that the value of Bitcoin will go up, then you wouldn't want to borrow Bitcoin in order to buy a house, because then you'd be hopelessly underwater on your mortgage, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So there are very trivial reasons why the cryptocurrencies are not very well thought out. The people designing them have never thought about money. And I hope by the end of this course you will have as much contempt for that as I do. Okay, so that's kind of the trajectory of the course. So I want to stop here. I want to kind of see if anything has anybody has anything to put on the table, whether it's something you are curious about, whether it's like, here's what brought me to this course, here's what I hope we kind of can talk about, or here's what I noticed in the first readings today that I thought was interesting. So if we use the raise your hand function, and I'll call on you. Yeah, Michael.
I just had a question based on something you just said. So you said that it would have been really difficult for people who lived prior to the modern monetary regime to be confused about money. But the Scott Meikle definitely makes it sound like Aristotle is very confused about money. So I was wondering, like Meikle seems to suggest that there's this potential like ethical motive for why Aristotle might be confused about that, or he may not even be confused. He might just be like trying to salvage his ethical system or something. But I was wondering if you could draw some attention to that, because elaborate on that a bit, because it seems pretty obvious. Like, well, he's like, well, there's these two different uses for money. Why don't maybe there's two different kinds of money, like instead of just this one use that's supposed to be prohibited and that's profane, and the other use that is totally good and normal.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So I mean, maybe my statement is a little too broad. I mean, certainly people in the past could have been confused about money, I guess. But I mean, my specific point, and maybe in some ways, I think is more true of, say, late medieval or early modern Europe than it is of Greece, which is that just the difference between unit of account and the means of exchange is very obvious. This actually is not quite the same in ancient Greece. So maybe that's maybe so. My statement is a little too broad, possibly, but the point kind of remains that well, let me rephrase it. The fact of money's essential difference, or its difference from itself, has been particularly obscured in the modern monetary regime in a way that it wasn't as much in the past, right? And I hope you'll see more what I mean by that by the time we get to week 7 or 8, when we read Rebecca Spang in particular, who I think is very good on this point. So Aristotle. Well, okay, let me maybe just start talking about Aristotle. Well, I'll start talking about Aristotle unless somebody else has something they want Anybody want to put something on the table before this might take me 15, 20 minutes. Okay. So the mainstream theory of money that we find in Aristotle, and that is taken up by all kinds of thinkers, including Marx, right? I mean, it's Marx's theory of money is really an Aristotelian one up until the point where he discovers labor. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the fundamental basis concept in Aristotle's theory of money is the idea of commensuration, which literally means putting things together on a table, right? So when you and the table, the mensa, has a specific connotation of money changing. So that the name for money changers, whether it's trapezitai in Greek, or even banker in English, both come etymologically from the idea of a table. And so when you think about commensuration, putting things together on the table, imagine you have a scale, right? You're balancing things. And Aristotle's argument is that, we exchange things. Aristotle begins by saying, look, basically the political community is constituted by two things. One of them is interdependence, right? We need each other. We need each other in order to reproduce our lives. And it's also constituted by inequality, right? So what Marx discovers as the secret of monetary exchange is actually there in Aristotle explicitly from the beginning. Aristotle says, people are unequal, right? The horse trainer is better than the cobbler. And so their inequality has to be recognized in the way that what they produce is exchanged against one another. And so because people are unequal, we need to commensurate what they produce, so that this inequality can kind of be socially recognized through exchange. But the idea is that what is created in a monetary economy, right? We have a kind of phenomenology of a monetary economy that says what it is a system of equations, right? One house is equal to 2 horses is equal to 100 shoes, whatever. And that what happens when exchange happens is the exchange of equals, okay? The exchange of things that are equal in some way. Now, what is, in Aristotle's view, the basis of this equality? Well, for Aristotle, it is convention. It is, nomos, which is a difficult and tricky word that we can talk more about, okay? Marx takes most of this theory and then he says, Aristotle is missing something. Because Aristotle didn't believe that everyone was equal, he couldn't really find the secret which is value, right? So Marx says, really, it's the labor time that really explains all of this that's going on. And underneath this, it's not, like Aristotle thinks, convention. But his view is the same up till then. But the fundamental point is that market exchange is understood phenomenologically as a system of equations. Now, of course, we know that in the real world this doesn't necessarily happen, right? The market fluctuates. And so the purpose of this theory for Aristotle was to determine what he called justice in exchange, which is basically just the exchange of equivalence. So an exchange would be unjust if what I get back is less than what I give, right? Justice is constituted by the fact that when an exchange happens, it is the movement from one equality to another equality, right? Nothing, there is some underlying, value is what this concept eventually becomes. That kind of, so like value is conserved in exchange. It's a conservation principle, like in physics. And it might be that empirically, this doesn't always happen, right? Maybe you get cheated or something like that. But it's sort of what should happen, and it's what does happen kind of in the aggregate, right? Because the idea is, if I'm a merchant and I cheat you by selling something for more than it's really worth, it's a zero-sum relation, right? So you lost something and I got something, so nothing was really produced in there. It is all zero-sum, whether or not it occurs at kind of this equilibrium point that we're imagining must exist. Now, the problem with this view is that it assumes that the market exists, and it assumes that the market exists for free. So it assumes essentially that when I want to transact, I am able to find somebody who wants to transact in the opposite direction from me. Now, one problem similar to what I'm saying is what the economics textbook calls the double coincidence of wants. Okay, maybe y'all have heard of this. So according to the economists, the problem of exchange is the fact that I have an apple and I want a carrot, and in order to do that, I have to find somebody who has a carrot and wants an apple, right? So we have the problem of what I'm going to call heterogeneous particularities. Okay, so or what Marxists might call use values, right? So the apple has a certain kind of use value. The carrot has a use value. They're heterogeneous. They're different from each other. They're particular. They can't be compared with each other. And in order to exchange them, we need to compare them in some way. And according to the mainstream view about money, the sort of textbook view, this is why we invent money. And we invent money through a process of suspension of disbelief, right? We all agree to pretend that money actually has value, even though it's just a sterile piece of metal that you can't do anything with. We all agree to pretend that it has value anyway, because that makes it possible for us to avoid the double coincidence of wants, right? So I bring this up because that is not what I'm saying. I'm not making an argument about the double coincidence of wants. Okay, so I'm not talking about the problem of I have an apple, how do I get a carrot? I need somebody who wants an apple, has a carrot. No. I'm saying, okay, so suppose we have money. Just suppose it exists. I want to sell my apple for money. If I want to sell my apple for money, I still have to find somebody who has money and wants an apple, right? So in fact, introducing money doesn't solve the problem of the coincidence of wants, because it doesn't explain why somebody would be either buying or selling apples. If I have an apple and I want money for it, I need to find somebody who's buying apples. If I have money and I want an apple, I need to find somebody who's selling apples. So there is a desire to be on one side of the transaction or the other that is not really any different than the problem of the double coincidence of wants, right? So the double coincidence, so money doesn't solve the double coincidence of wants because it doesn't explain why people would want to buy or sell at all. So in order to have my demand to transact accommodated, if I have money and want apples, or if I have apples and want money, I only have two options. One is that I can go someplace where a market exists. I take my apples to the market. I find somebody who's sitting there saying, I will buy the apples, and I sell the apples and I leave with my money. Now, if that market doesn't exist, what am I going to do? Well, I have no choice really except to sit there myself and wait for somebody else to come along and want to take the other side of the trade, right? So the fact that I can find a market in existence when I want to transact means that somebody else must be making the market. And what it means to make a market is to take a fundamentally different attitude towards monetary exchange than I am doing, right? So, and the difference is that I am what Jack Trainer calls a time investor. So in Marx, both capitalists and proletarians are the same with respect to the market. So Marx wants to introduce a class distinction between proletarians and capitalists by saying, look, proletarians are engaged in CMC exchange. They sell their labor power, they get money, they get back wage goods. Capitalists, by contrast, are doing MCM. You all know this theory, right? But the problem is that capitalists are also require access to the market because they need to realize what they produce in exchange. There must be a market in existence for them to sell what they produce and restart the next cycle of accumulation. This is what Capital Volume 3 is about. Okay? So from the perspective of the market itself, there is no difference between proletarians and capitalists because both of them need to access the market in a certain time and in a certain direction. Hey, Valerie, glad you can make it. Hello. So both of them require, right? If the capitalist has goods, he has shoes, he needs to sell them because he needs to restart making shoes. He can't buy shoes. He's only a seller, and he needs to sell now. By contrast, the proletarian needs to buy shoes for their kids, right? They need shoes now. They can only go in one direction and at a certain time. So what we can call time investors, which is a category that includes both proletarians and capitalists in relation to the market, are actors who are inflexible with regard to the direction of their transaction, right? Proletarians got to buy food, else they starve. Capitalists got to sell their products, else they go out of business. They're inflexible to the direction of transaction, and they are also inflexible to the time of transaction. What this means is that they only have one axis of flexibility left, which is what? Am I following along well enough? What's the one thing that they can be flexible in regard to?
And this is about time investors, yes?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. If you have to buy shoes and you have to buy them now, there's only one thing that is left to be determined.
Price?
Yeah, good. The price. Yeah, excellent. Right. Yeah, you got to buy shoes. You got to buy them now. The only flexibility you have is how much you're going to pay for them. Right. So flexibility is not necessarily a good thing, right? I mean, you're flexible. That means you can be extorted. Okay. So in order to make this possible, this demand to transact of the time investor must be matched by somebody on the other side of the trade. Okay. So this agent must have the opposite characteristics. That means they must be flexible with regard to the time of the transaction. Yeah, sure, I can transact now or not. They can be flexible with regard to the direction of the transaction. I buy apples, I sell apples. Either one, your call, right? Now, what does this mean? Well, they must be inflexible with regard to the price. Okay. So they're the exact opposite. Now, this agent is what we're going to call the dealer. And the dealer is really central to the story that I'm going to be telling you about money, right? What I'm going to be trying to show you is that theories of money, until me, well, until really Perry Merling and Jack Trainer and some of these other people that I'm synthesizing, have assumed away the dealer. They've suppressed the dealer. They have made the dealer seem like, a parasite on the system, right? The dealer, to the extent that there are people who buy high and sell low, right? This is the essence of medieval economic thought. They're just middlemen. They're not really doing anything. They're unproductive, right? And so they're not really necessary. The market in its ideal state would work without them. I'm going to try to argue to you that this is not the case, that the dealer, the entity that makes the market, is fundamental to understanding money. And the reason for this is that the dealer prices liquidity. And I'll try to explain to you how they do that as we go on. So the dealer puts a price on liquidity, which means that they are pricing money itself. And this is a problem for the Aristotelian theory of money, inherited by Marx, because money is supposed to be what gives everything else a price. Money is supposed to be the thing that we compare everything else to so that we can compare them to each other. If money itself has a price, then that means that money is not the same as itself, because the price of $10 is not $10, which means that when you buy money, you are not engaged in the exchange of equivalents. And in fact, you can't be. Okay? This is why Marx in Capital 3 is insistent that money cannot have a price beyond its own price. He is scornful of the idea. Right? Now, he's inherited this from medieval condemnations of usury, right? Money lending, right? It's the idea that the lending of money, the charging of money for money is, it's scandalous. It is impious. you're selling what belongs to God, which is time. There's all kinds of but Marx is an inheritor of this whole kind of line of thought. But what I want to suggest to you is that the dealer really matters, and we need to understand the dealer function as being at the core of the monetary system, because the dealer prices liquidity, and because the price of liquidity is a political problem. Okay, the price of money, how much it costs in order to get money, is a fundamental social antagonism. And that is where the state comes in, because the state is a rival to the dealers to set the price of liquidity. Right? So part of what I'm going to try to show you as we go through these various historical case studies is that the existence of a monetary economy opens the question of who will pay for liquidity, who will pay to reproduce the existence of the market. And social struggles over the monetary system are essentially composed of different classes of society trying to force each other to pay for liquidity. Right? The nobles try to force the peasants to pay for liquidity, or they try to force the merchants to pay for liquidity, and all of this kind of stuff. Right? So the question of who has to pay the cost of producing liquidity is a question of social political antagonism that gets elided, it gets hidden when we assume that the existence of the market and money comes for free and has no price. So that is an assumption that Marx takes on board in order to uncover the exploitation that happens in the factory. Now, because this is something people always worry about, am I denying that there is exploitation on the shop floor? No, of course not. Right? Yes, I mean, your boss is a jerk. What I'm and he doesn't pay you as much as you produce. And of course, all of this is very true. The problem is, what happens if the theory that we create in order to theorize that assumes away other kinds of social conflict that may even be more important in understanding kind of what's going on in our world today. So part of what I hope you take away from this course of study that I'm offering for you is an understanding about how many of the conflicts that we're experiencing today have nothing to do with capitalism, because this kind of stuff has been happening for a long time, right? So problems about debt, finance, struggles over the price of liquidity, these are things that we can find in very ancient history, and they have been they've been rearranged and transformed in certain ways by financial and monetary developments of modernity, but they were not created by modernity. And so to the extent that we understand these conflicts and these problems as capitalism problems, I'm suggesting to you that we fail to understand them adequately. So that's what I hope you kind of have an understanding of by the time we get to. Okay, so I want to make sure that we kind of understand this thing that I'm laying on the table about the dealers and the dealers pricing liquidity. Let me restate some things, maybe add some things I didn't say, and then you can ask questions. So the point is that the dealers make the market by making themselves inflexible with regard to price. Okay, the dealer quotes a price, and the dealer makes the market by quoting a price. If you're a dealer in the modern stock exchange, you have responsibilities. In order to get a dealer's license, that means you have to do certain things. And what that means is that you have an obligation to quote a price to anybody who asks you, right? So if you're a dealer and somebody calls you on the phone and says, hey, how much are you buying McDonald's stock for? You are not allowed to say, oh, I'm not interested in McDonald's stock right now, right? You have to quote a price, okay? So you have to quote a price at which you are willing to either buy or sell McDonald's shares of McDonald's, right? So the dealer the dealer quotes a spread, and spread is going to be a very central concept of what we're talking about, right? So rather than thinking about the market as a system of prices, like you get in Capital Volume 1, we're going to be thinking about the market as a series of spreads, as a system of spreads, differences between two prices. And what really matters is not the price. What matters is the size of the spread in between the two prices. So the dealer is saying, yeah, I buy apples, I sell apples, I don't care. The only question is, what's the price? Well, if I can buy apples for $10 a pound, I mean, yeah, I'll buy them. If I can sell them for $12 a pound, I'll sell them. And I don't really care, because what I care about is picking up the spread between those things. Okay. And furthermore, we shouldn't imagine that I'm, as the dealer, that I'm warehousing the apples, right? I'm not actually, I can separate out the warehousing function part of this. And I do this by dealing in futures contracts. So I don't actually buy your apples that you bring me. You come to me and you say, I got some apples on the tree. They're going to be ripe next month. I want to sell them to you. And I say, yeah, sure. I'm going to buy them from you. Now, I don't actually want the apples. I have no place to put them. What I'm going to try to do is have somebody else come to me. He says, oh, I need some apples next month. Will you sell them to me? I say, yeah, sure. And then next month comes and I've bought apples and sold apples, and I can pick up the difference between the two prices, right? Or it can go the other way. Somebody comes to me and says, I need apples next month. Well, I don't have any apples, but that's no problem. I could still sell them to you because I can write you a contract. I say, yeah, I'm going to contract to deliver apples to you next month. Now, well, it just means that by the time next month rolls around, I have to find the apples someplace in order to match my book, okay? So dealers create liquidity. They provide liquidity to the market by accommodating the demand to transact presented to them by time investors. Okay, they accommodate the demand to transact. And when they do this, they take onto their own book, onto their own, so when I say their own book, onto their own capital, they take on the risk that the market might cease to exist in the future. Okay? Because if I sell you apples that I don't have, and then the market in apples ceases to exist, I'm going to be screwed because there's no apples to be had anywhere, right? So that's what's called a short. That's what's called a short squeeze. So there is a price. So most traditional theories of money begin by assuming that the market exists. Just a second, yeah, and that the price of liquidity is zero. What I'm suggesting to you, this is not the case. There is always the risk that the market might cease to exist in the future. And this is what the dealers price. The dealers, by pricing liquidity, price the risk that the market might not exist in the future. Okay? And therefore, what they're pricing is something with political implications. Because if the market ceases to exist in the future, now it's a problem for the government, right? So there is a political problem about the anxiety of whether the market will continue to exist, and dealers price this by making the market. And so we cannot understand the making of the market unless we understand that liquidity has a price and that it is priced by dealers. And this is a fundamental political problem about the monetary system that is completely suppressed by everything that you read in classical political economy. Okay? Yeah, okay, questions. Valerie.
So just in regards to markets may not exist in the future, I guess the greater implication is that, well, especially with the price being flexible, it's not like combining the idea that markets may not exist in the future and the short squeezes and like the fact that it's not the price, but rather the spread. It seems to be more of a like theory about how different sort of distributions are upheld by time liquidity. I know not time liquidity, but yeah, it's a question of how different distributions are upheld by liquidity. And so it's not even about if markets may not exist, but more so if it's just increasingly unfavorable to what that spread was expected to be.
Yeah, so I hope I understand your question correctly. So
oh, yes.
So you can, if I don't answer it, you can respond again. Well, let me put it this way. If there wasn't a risk that the market might cease to exist, then the market couldn't exist. This is the paradox. Because if there wasn't a risk that the market might cease to exist in the future, then the dealers would have nothing to price because the spread would be zero. And therefore they'd have no reason to be dealers. And so they wouldn't be sitting there in the market trying to pick up the spread. So the situation that classical political economy describes as the ideal state of the market is really the condition of impossibility of the market. That's the situation in which the spread is zero and then nobody can profit from making the market, and so actually the dealers have been squeezed out, and there is no more market anymore. So there has to be this anxiety about the market's non-existence in order, like the market kind of lives on that, right? That's the beating heart of the market, is its own anxiety.
Yes, okay.
I'm not sure if that addresses what you mean by distribution. Can you clarify what you mean by distribution?
So I guess like part of the implications of the fact that there may not be markets in the future is that there's this constant flux of how spreads move across, as well as like the distribution of spreads may move. And so like I guess at the root of any sort of price going up or down, as well as spreads going like closer or wider, is that anxiety of markets not existing in the future.
Right. Yes, exactly. And dealers need that. That's what they profit on. So the dealers want there to be uncertainty about whether the market will continue to exist. But they want, well, maybe but they need you to be overpaying for that, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to make a profit. So they need the actual risk of the future to be less than the implied risk of the future, right? So the current state of the market implies something about the future, and they need the future to actually turn out less risky than that in a certain kind of way, right? We can, this gets into some slightly more technical stuff that maybe we can talk about more in detail towards the end of the class.
It's that one quote. It's like, after me, then the flood, right?
Right. Yes. That gets to another kind of issue, which is, so, I mean, the problem is the extent to which existential uncertainty gets repressed, right? And this is obviously a problem for us about climate change. So this is why I teach the money stuff when I teach about climate change, is because there's the extent to which, to what extent do we just have to write off existential risk because there's no way to hedge against it, right? So consider this, right? I can't write you an insurance contract that would hedge you against the possible state of the world in which nobody is paying their contracts. Because I write you a contract that says, well, if in the future nobody is enforcing contracts, I'll pay you $100. Well, if that comes to pass, then nobody's going to enforce the contract. It says I owe you $100. So you actually, this is an existential risk that you actually can't hedge against within the financial system. So this, what you're raising are some very deep kind of issues. We need to read some other stuff that is on the syllabus of this class to really get into it. But this definitely, it goes in that direction. You're absolutely right. Yeah, Mike. Fabius.
Either is fine. I have one question regarding this problem, which is that the whole theory of the dealer and the market maker comes from finance specifically, right? Where this whole system is at least particularly visible. But I'm wondering, is that in fact the underlying structure of the entire economy? Are there actually Apple dealers that deal with buy a local supermarket? And just really quickly, the other question is more specifically on the chartalist critique text by Kelton et al. And sorry, this is very nitty gritty, but I just couldn't quite wrap my head around what they were going for. On page 12, they write, until recently, coins never had a nominal value stamped on them, but rather nominal value was announced by proclamation. And I was just wondering, what is the difference between value being stamped on something and it being proclaimed? Yeah. What are the two different, deep structures at work there?
Yeah. We'll talk about, I'm going to save most second question for a later session. I'll begin by saying just the claim is factually mistaken. It is not the case that coins never had value stamped on them until the modern period. Many Roman coins have numbers stamped on them that expresses their value in terms of another coin. So some coins do and other coins don't, and that is an important clue because it tells us which coin is the unit of account and which one is the means of exchange, right? So they're just factually mistaken because they haven't read many coins. What they are talking about though does matter, and this is the problem of crying up and down coins. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, right, the French unit of account is livres, pounds basically, and the écu is a gold coin, and it has a legal value in pounds, but it's not stamped on the coin. It has no marking of value. And the French king can make a proclamation that says, yesterday the écu was 54 livres, but today it's 55. Those are not the right units, but this is the point, right? He can proclaim that the coins will be revalued, and this is an important monetary policy lever. So that's what they are pointing at, and we'll read more about this when we look at Spang, because what happens in the French Revolution is that they try to enforce parity between the unit of account and the circulating medium. So they take this monetary policy lever off the table from the Ancien regime by enforcing a strict parity between the two things. So some of the facts of that claim are mistaken, but the phenomenon that they're calling attention to is important, and we'll consider that later on. Sorry, remind me of the first question.
Just if since the whole market maker theory comes from finance specifically,
is this
a more general feature of the economy? Yeah.
Okay. So question of dealers. So I'm going to correct something Ulysses said. They're not quite. So supermarkets are not apple dealers, because supermarkets don't want to buy your apples. Like, you can't walk into the supermarket and sell them the apples back. They only sell them. But supermarkets work with apple dealers. I mean, these are just commodities markets. So this is what they do on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. If you read about the price of wheat or something, there's a dealer market and forward contracts for wheat, and that's where the supermarkets get their wholesale stuff, right? So there's a wholesale market in commodities futures that is where the dealer market is. In explaining these concepts, I try to use very tangible things to help people imagine exactly what's happening, because I want you to think about these things as very literal transactions and learn to kind of keep your eye on exactly where everything goes. And this is important, well, because most people have a folk belief that money is destroyed when you spend it, right? So just getting people to realize that the money isn't destroyed when you spend it requires paying attention to where things go, right? But this is something Marx understands. I mean, he gets this in Capital Volume 3. It's the money market. It's the dealer market in money itself where everything ends up. So yeah, there's commodity dealers and everything, but all of these dealers require access to the dealer market in money in order to fund what they're doing. So the master dealer market, on which all other dealer markets depend, is the dealer market in money. Right. So kind of a short answer to your question, and Brodel is really the guy to read to really understand this, but the dealer market at the top of the monetary economy is kind of a self-organizing thing. It kind of assembles itself. There's a natural tendency for, kind of because of path dependence and because of power law scaling and stuff like that, there's people who end up at the top of the hierarchy, and they're the ones who make the market in money, and how the market in money is made is what controls the price of everything else in the economy, right? So in the fairs, right? So in 15th and 16th century Europe, there's these fairs, right? Every 3 months in a different place, they have a fair, and primarily what is done at these fairs is setting the price of money. So all the merchants come together to the fair, and they all have debts against each other, and they all net out these debts, and then the fair says what the rate of interest is that they're going to use in order to roll over everything else until the next fair, right? So what these fairs do is set the price of money, and this has ripple down effects to the entire rest of the economy. So my examples are going to involve produce because it's easy, but you should always remember that we're really talking about money. We're talking about buying and selling money forward because that's what you need in order to do all this other stuff. Ulysses. Well, I think Thomas, I think you're next. You're muted. I don't know. You forgot what? Oh, there you go.
Me?
Yeah.
No. I don't have a question. I must be honest.
I see. Okay. Great, Oscar.
Okay, so I had a question that I think builds off of what you're just saying, which is like when I was reading the Chartist Critique of John Locke, there's a claim in there that I was wondering about, which is that the market is motivated by the desire to earn means of settling debts or to acquire means of settling debts.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious both just like how historically valid or helpful that is, as well as how that fits with the dealer-centric model that you're putting in, which and like whether that's different or congruent, and sort of seems like a relationship between a market based on a desire for liquidity versus for means of debt settlement.
Good. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about the Chartist story then. Well, okay, in a way, okay. So the starting place is kind of to begin with the medalist theory, right? Which is, we all agreed to use money because it made things easier, and it's kind of spontaneous, and it's consensus, and we all do it together. There's two big problems with this story. One is the dealer stuff, right? The fact that the market has a price and has to be made. That's what I've been talking about to you so far. The other problem is the problem of the state, which is that this story doesn't involve the state. It involves a bunch of individuals agreeing to trade with each other peacefully. Well, one can't help but notice when you study the history of money that everything that happens in monetary history, every time something is happening, something new is happening, it's always in the context of state building and warfare, and in particular, naval warfare. Like almost every single monetary revolution in history is the people who are doing it are building a fleet, and that's why they're doing it, right? So the naval stuff really, really matters. And so the problem is that economies are monetized. And when I mean that an economy is monetized, I mean that people use money every day for everyday kind of transactions. I don't mean, so when we talk about the cowrie shells, we're going to be talking about like bride wealth and stuff a lot. So I don't mean, you have some gold that you hoard and you use it when you need to get married. I mean, you buy and sell stuff every day with money. Monetized economies are very clearly historically correlated with warfare. And it's very clear that economies become monetized because states are taxing and spending money. Okay. So on one hand, there's the problem of the dealer market. And on the other hand, there's the problem of the fiscal circuit. Okay. So what we're going to be trying to wrap our heads around is what's the relation between those two. That's really what my work is about, is trying to understand those two things as being connected, but in tension with one another, right? So there's also the fiscal circuit. There's the fact that, well, the state creates money. Money has the mark of the king on it. It's got his head on it, right? And you need money because that's what you need to pay your taxes, okay? So the Chartist theory of money introduces the idea that money has something to do with the state. It's not just that money exists and the state needs it just like everybody else does, which is the story that you get if you turn on CNN, right? No. It's that states monetize economies by their fiscal activity. Now, there's two versions of the Chartist story. Okay. The version that you'll hear more often is the tax story. So the idea is that the government, well, think about it this way. Say you have an army and you need to supply your army with various things, grain, food, horses. Well, you could organize all of this yourself, right? You could have a subject population. Well, first of all, you could make the soldiers do it themselves. They could be citizen soldiers who pay their own way, like in early Rome, like in early Greece, hoplites. Or you could have a subject population that you get the stuff from, and then you give it to the soldiers, and you organize all this yourself. But the other thing you could do is you could give all the soldiers pieces of metal with your face on it, and then you could go to the peasants and say, I need you to give me some of these pieces of metal or else I'll chop off your head. And then the soldiers have to get it from the soldiers. Sorry, the peasants have to get it from the soldiers, right? So you have a public sector that you fund, you have a private sector that you tax, and the private sector has to get the money from the public sector in order to pay the taxes, because you don't accept just anything, you only accept the thing with your stamp on it, right? So this is the chartalist theory that taxation drives the value of money, that money has value because that's the only thing you can use to pay your taxes. There's a grain of truth in this. But the stronger version of the chartalist story is a little different. And this one is more compatible with historical data. The stronger version is that the value of money is supported by legal jurisdiction. So basically, if we're both English people and you owe me money, if you pay me that money, well, suppose you owe me money and I take you to court. I take you to the common law court, and I say Oscar owes me money. He refuses to pay. Make him pay me. And the court says, yeah, you do owe him money, and we're going to make you pay him. But they're going to enforce that debt in legal money, in English pennies. So if you owe me £1 and I collect that debt from the court, the court is going to enforce that you have to pay me 240 English pennies. Okay, so the court enforces debts in money that it recognizes legally. And what matters is that, well, if the court recognizes that money, they can change the definition of the money. So they could change the definition of the legal English penny so that it now had half as much silver in it, but you would still be paying me my debt, right? So this is really a stronger version of the chartalist claim, which is that what gives money its value is the fact that that's what courts enforce for the payment of debts. Does that answer your question?
Definitely. I mean, I think, yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. So we will talk more. We'll talk more about this because it's important, but the story that the chartalists tell is a little confused. So especially when we get to the, we'll go back to this critique of John Locke thing in later sessions. Okay, Joshua.
Hello. So my question is, I understand how you're saying that a market maker, a dealer, sets the price of liquidity. I don't see what this has to do with the risk that the market will cease to exist.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yep. Mm-hmm. So as a dealer, you have a limited amount of capital. So you have to, so the easiest way to think about it is that, well, okay, so in order to fund a position that I have on my books, I have to borrow money in order to do that. So suppose you come to me and you say, you know, I need to sell you these apples. How much will you pay me? And I say, you know, here's my price, and I pay you the money. I had to get that money from someplace. So assume that I borrowed it, right? So I am the dealer in apples, but I had to borrow money from the market of money in order to fund this position. Now, my question is, I'm trying to wait long enough in order for the market to balance out, right? So right now, everybody's selling and I'm buying because I'm the dealer. What I want to do is to wait long enough in order for people to be buying, and then I can offload what I bought. But in the meantime, I have to fund my book, and not only do I have to fund my book, I have to compete with other possible investments, right? There's a cost of capital, including the opportunity cost of capital. So the fact that I'm using my capital to be in the dealer's business means I have to be making a certain kind of return, or else my investors will invest in something else, some other line of business. So me sitting there trying to wait long enough for the market to balance out costs me something. And the question is whether I can wait long enough for that to happen. The question is also whether the market will exist long enough in order for that to happen. So if I buy a bunch of apples that I don't want because I'm planning to sell them, and then before I can sell them, the market in apples ceases to exist, now I lost all this money and I have apples that I don't want it to do anything with, and that's a problem for me. So the fact that the market in apples might cease to exist is a risk that I'm taking by inserting myself into the market in such a way that I assume the risk of the market's incompleteness, right? Because when I buy the apples that I don't want, so what am I doing for my client? I'm making it appear from the perspective of my client that the market has already completed the transaction, that they've sold the apples and they have realized their value, as Marx would put it. But this hasn't actually happened. I'm just sitting with it. In order for that to actually happen in the future, the market has to still exist. And so if the market ceases to exist before I can finish the transaction, then I'm going to be left holding the bag. And so that's why I've assumed the risk that the market might cease to exist. Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah, so the market for apples ceasing to exist means nobody wants to buy apples anymore.
Right. Yeah. Apples can't be bought or sold at any price. It means the spread is widening. So not only nobody wants to buy apples, it also becomes very hard to sell apples. I don't want to take any more apples onto my book. So the spread is gonna widen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Ulysses.
I just wanted to, I think I'm confused about the supermarket and apples example, because when I walk into a supermarket, they seem pretty inflexible about their prices. And I also know, like, if I had enough apples at the right price, the supermarket would be willing to buy them. But if I tried to sell them one apple,
yeah,
they would be like not worth their time.
Right.
So in that sense, it seems like they're both willing to buy and sell apples. So that seems like they're flexible to direction, time, kind of.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's a scale of your product that they care about more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. I got the same question in my other class. I mean, people. I think it's best to assume away the retailer, right? Because the retailer is kind of intermediating between you and the dealer market. So it kind of looks like that from your. So, well, the more general point is that the monetary system is perspectival, right? And so we'll read about Merling talks about this. We'll read about this a little bit more. Things can be different depending on where you are in the system. So, I mean, for us, from our perspective, bank deposits are money just as much as other money is. But that's not true from the perspective of the bank itself, right? So depending on where you are in the credit hierarchy, things can be different because of your perspective. This is a similar kind of problem, I think, is that, So from your perspective, the supermarket looks like a dealer, but that's not really how they think about their business. Because I don't know. I need a better answer for exactly why retailers aren't the dealers, but they, the supermarket is kind of held captive to what's going on in the dealer market. I mean, they, if things happen, they're going to have to, but they're probably doing like cost markup pricing and stuff. So if we want to read about retailers, like the Fred Lee is really the stuff to kind of think about. So it's, from our perspective, it all looks kind of the same, I think, but it's not that they're not really the dealer market.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess the bigger question, though, is like, are we overgeneralizing from the financial world we know today? And can we see things like dealers happening before modern financial?
Oh, there's definitely dealer markets happening. And I mean, there is literally a dealer market in money in the late Roman Empire. I mean, we'll talk about it. I mean, it's not a metaphor. I mean, that's literally what they're doing. I think the answer would be the supermarket can't really be flexible about whether they buy apples. They're actually, I mean, they're inflexible. They have to buy apples. If the supermarket doesn't have any apples on their shelves, they're no longer a going concern as a supermarket. So they are really inflexible about buying apples in a way that is a little different than the dealers. Is kind of what I would say is goodwill of dealer. Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, the same thing happened. I mean, we start trying to like analyze every single possible business model in the ecology of modern capitalism. I think what I'm presenting is a little bit of an idealized abstraction, right? And I'm also not presenting you the full details about how modern dealer markets work, which is very complicated, and the math is over my head. It's like, but the point is more that there is an idealized abstraction in classical political economy, which assumes away the dealers, and we kind of need to add the dealers as an additional complication, but it's still an abstract model, right? I mean, I'm just trying to put in this extra stuff. Yeah, Valerie.
So just a real quick question, I guess, or like clarification. So this means because the view of money changes based on where you are. Like, for example, in my experience, running my business with teaching coding and like employing a couple of my friends, I found that like paying for training or like paying for food is like really like the scale of like costs is completely like alien to the way that I think about money on a day-to-day basis. And like, I don't know, trying to combine those two results in some very interesting and like different ways of looking at it from both perspectives. But also that's like kind of irrelevant, just like a personal experience. But I think one interesting way, for example, to see this change in perspective would be, say, the like goal for vertical integration for a lot of different companies, going from like a specialized service to like something that provides everything on the entire stack. And as they get increasingly vertically integrated, they are increasingly dealing more with the dealer's market, I would say, right?
Right. So the bigger you get, the closer you get to the dealer market. The dealer market is a wholesale business. So another distinction that we will be considering is the wholesale retail distinction. And it's very important to understand that there are wholesale monies and there are retail monies, and these are not the same, right? And this also, you know, kind of becomes a distinction between the money of the rich and the money of the poor, which we'll also be talking about. So I think kind of what you're gesturing towards is this idea. Well, you know, what is being imagined in this model, this classical political economy idea of the monetary economy? Well, it's purely a retail market. It doesn't begin with the difference between retail and wholesale, which I think is coming up in some of the stuff we're talking about here. Yeah. Anybody else?
Was there more to do with the lecture, or because I think?
Yeah, I can keep going. So I hope you see, right, there's obviously problems with this traditional medalist theory of money, the spontaneous consensus kind of stuff. This story can't be true. Now, the question is the challenge of chartalism, right? And the extent to which this legal theory of money can fix what's wrong about the medalist theory of money. And obviously the way that I'm saying it, I think the answer is no, that is incomplete theory. But it does raise some issues that we need to make a better theory about, because we can't assume away the relation between money and the state. The problem with the chartalist theory, well, there's many problems. One problem is that it takes the state for granted. So it just assumes that the state exists and that the state has the power to do all of these things. So it removes the question of the constitution of the state, the question of the legitimacy of the state. And maybe the easiest way to see this is this. So I've been telling you that the monetary system is anxious about its own future non-existence, and that it prices this anxiety and that this anxiety is the price of liquidity, and that's what makes the whole thing tick. Now, the question is, well, what happens when this anxiety comes to pass? What happens when the market starts to cease to exist? Well, the spreads start to open up. Dealers are charging more and more to make the market because they are more and more anxious about whether the market will continue to exist. This is a self-reinforcing dynamic. Well, what does the state do? The state steps in and says, we're going to guarantee the existence of the market. Don't worry, right? We got it. That's what they did in 2008. That's what they did again last year when COVID started to happen, right? So the market begins to cease to exist, and the state steps in to act as what we now call the dealer of last resort by acting itself as a dealer. But it's a different kind of dealer because it's the only dealer that doesn't have to fund its position. It doesn't have to borrow money because it can create money out of nothing. Now, how can it do that? How can that be? Well, we're gonna tell a story about that over the next couple months, right? Because if that seems weird and bizarre, well, I mean, it is. I mean, it's very strange. But the state steps in and it says, well, from your perspective, money is scarce. From my perspective, money is not scarce. Because what is money? What is this thing that you call money? This is just my liability. All it is a piece of paper that says I owe you money. And if you you have $20, it says, I mean, this is more obvious on British money. It says, the Queen promises to pay you £1. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you bring the Queen your pound note, she'll give it right back to you, right? She will repay this pound by giving you £1, just like it says. Okay, so the money that we use is nothing but a liability of the state. Okay, now let's think about how this fits into the taxation story, which is a false story. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go on, but let's not worry about the fact that it's false. Let's just understand how. I mean, it's true about our world. It's just not. So what the chartalists are trying to do is they're trying to take this thing that's true about our world, which is that our money is nothing but a liability of the state, and they're trying to say, and that's how money has always been. Money has always been nothing but a liability of the state. This is categorically historically false. It's not the case. Okay, the first time that an English king ever accepted back his own money at face value was in 1431, and he didn't want to do it. He was forced to do it by Parliament against his will. So it's absolutely not. It's just historically not true. But it's true of our world, right? And they're trying to project this back onto the past. And as I'm going to try to show you, that has very deep ideological implications because they are erasing from history the constitutional revolution that was required in order to make money modern, which really happened in the English 17th century. So the English had to chop the head off their king before they could make money modern, and that really matters. Okay, so we'll talk more about this. But okay, but the point is that if you have $20 in your pocket, all it is a piece of paper that says the government owes you $20. Now, how does that do you any good? Well, tax time comes and the government says, hey, you owe me $20. And then you say, aha, you owe me $20. And if I owe you $20 and you owe me $20, then we don't owe each other anything, right? We can net these debts out and they annihilate each other. So the idea is that the government creates money by spending it into existence, by creating liabilities, and then imposing a unilateral liability in tax time that you can then use these other liabilities to net out, right? So that's why you can pay your taxes with money, because it's a liability of the state. Now, this raises the question, well, what about state debt, right? We talk about money and we talk about state debt and we talk about the state having a debt to pay money. Well, what happens when the state pays its debt? The state has a treasury bond. It promises to pay you back $100 in 5 years. Well, when you get paid, all the state is doing is swapping one form of its liability for another form of its liability, right? Treasury bonds are a liability of the state. They're a promise to pay dollars, which are also a liability of the state. Now, they're different liabilities. They have different structures. One of them pays interest, the other one doesn't. But fundamentally, they're both liabilities. So the state can't pay back its debt. It's like ontologically impossible for the state to pay back its debt because the only thing that it can pay that debt with is more debt. So it doesn't even make any sense to talk about paying off the debt, right? This is the problem. And MMT people, modern monetary theory people, they say, well, so there's no reason for this system. It's just confusion. We don't need to borrow money in order to spend it because they're the same thing. So why don't we just finance the state by printing money? Well, you can do that. Would the state paying off its debt just mean a contraction in the money supply? Well, it would be, depending on how you define the money supply, it would be it might be an expansion of the money supply. So if you have a bond and I print dollars in order to pay back your bond, now there's more dollars. But there's a deep question. I mean, are treasury bonds money? That's the question, right? I mean, we say that they're not money, but they kind of walks like money and talks like money and quacks like money. So why is it not money? Okay. So we have two different things that are both money. We make a distinction between them and we manage them differently. And we really care about the relation between them, about the relative prices of these two different monies. Now, from an MMT perspective, this is just illogical. It doesn't make any sense. When we put on our historian's hat, especially when in a couple weeks, when we read about the Roman Empire, it's immediately recognizable. It's bimetallism. There's always been two monies that have different values. One is a gold coin, and the other one's a silver coin. Or if we're talking about the late Roman Empire, one's a gold coin, and one's a bronze coin. And the bronze coin is reckoned in terms of the gold coin. And the whole question is about the market that exists between the two coins. In order to reproduce the monetary system, it needs to be possible to buy the gold coin with the bronze coin, or to sell the gold coin for the bronze coin. And you have to be able to trade back and forth between these two monies when you need to. And, well, it might be the case that one of these monies is for rich people and one of them is for poor people. And it might be the case that what happens with the two monies is different. And it might be the case that the government really cares about protecting the money of the rich people, and they're less concerned about protecting the money of the poor people. Okay, so the idea that there might be two different things that are both money that have different prices, one of which is big and one of which is small. I mean, we're just describing the way that things have been in the monetary system for 2,500 years. It's always been like that. Now, today it's hidden under some extra, there's some extra detail in there, but it's not really so mysterious as all of that once we kind of put on our historian's hat, right? Now, the problem becomes, once we recognize that, what do we do? Because now we've introduced distributional consequences into the management of the monetary system. We've said if there is a class division that exists in the monetary system itself, not just in control of the means of production, but in the monetary system itself, well, that means that when the government manages the monetary system, they are not managing it in order to produce a technically optimal goal of maximizing growth, which is what everybody wants, right? The liberal constitution is based upon the idea that growth is what everybody wants. Growth is what is good for everybody. And the job of the state and the state's control over the money is to manage the money such that we can have growth, which is what everybody wants. Well, what if we introduce the idea that there's something that not everybody wants? Some people want it, Other people don't want it. This thing is called asset inflation. And asset inflation means that people who already have wealth get richer, and people who don't have wealth and only have money find it more and more difficult to acquire wealth. Okay? Hope this sounds familiar, right? I mean, this is, right? So decisions that the government makes about how to manage the monetary system and about how to manage the difference that is inherent in the monetary system between big money and small money is a political decision with no universal consensus solution. Right? There is nothing that everybody wants. There is only a question of who's going to lose and who's going to benefit from it, right? And I'm gonna try to show you how this works in history, because that we can much better understand our own moment through a comparative analysis of how this stuff has worked throughout history. So the MMT, the neo-chartalist discourse is really important. It's really important, right? I mean, almost everything I'm going to say about it is negative, because I've spent the last 5 or 6 years critiquing it and fighting with these people about what they refuse to understand about the limitations of their own thought. But it's really important because it is challenging this idea that there is an ontological scarcity of money to which the state is subject. It's not true. It's not true. Money is not scarce from the perspective of the American state. But the problem is that once we admit that, now we're opening up a political can of worms that ultimately leads to the question of why there exists inequality in society at all. Once you say, yeah, money is non-scarce with respect to the state can fund any project that it decides to fund, whether or not that's true. Just assume that it is. Now the question is, okay, well, why doesn't the state fund a project to eliminate inequality from society, which it could do? Because what's the reason that we're told that the state can't do that? We don't have enough money. Well, but if there is enough money, then we can. And the question is, why haven't we? Okay. So, well, that's a deeply uncomfortable question. That's not a question anybody really wants to face up to, because now we have to think about what inequality really means. I mean, or what equality really means. That's a very scary concept. So there is a way. So part of what I'm going to, maybe here's another way to put it. So the MMT idea, one way to, so one argument they make is to project this back into all history, right? So Warren Mosler, who's this hedge fund guy who kind of invented MMT, he tells this story. He goes to Pompeii and he mansplains the tour guide about MMT, right? So that the tour guide is taking him around Pompeii, and there's like these gold coins, and he's like, aha, the government had to spin the coin before it could tax the coin, and he's explaining all of this to the tour guide and everything. So one this is not true of the Roman state, by the way. I mean, this is not how it worked. The Roman state was like very constrained by taxpayer revenue and stuff, especially in the early period. But so one way is to try to project this theory onto all of history, which is what you find in the Chartalist critique of John Locke, right? And so especially in that text, the most ludicrous statement in the whole text is when they draw on Leslie Kirk to argue that Greek city-states made coins out of silver for symbolic political reasons. They were like, this is the symbol of the democracy against the... This is just nonsense. Greeks made coins out of silver because silver was used in money in the ancient Near East for 2,000 years already. That's what the the mercantile commerce works on silver. It's silver is money. Okay. The other story you can try to tell is a story about how money became modern because we got rid of what Keynes calls the barbarous relic of precious metal, right? So the other story is that, well, money hasn't always been like this, but the fact that it wasn't like this is unnecessary. It's just because people were superstitious and thought money had to be made out of gold. And now it's not like that. After 1971, we got rid of gold. And so now the monetary system has been freed from the constraint of the gold standard. And so now we can do whatever we want. So this is equivalent to saying God is dead, and so everything is permitted, right? It used to be that there was God or gold, and he constrained us. Now he's dead. We no longer believe in that. So we can do whatever we want. We have total policy freedom in monetary and fiscal policy. That's one story you could tell. I would counter this by this is I think I stole this from Zizek. I mean, is the what if precisely the opposite is true? What if because God is dead, nothing is permitted? Right? This is the view that I would say. So what I would say is it's not that because we went off gold, now we can do whatever we want with the money. It's that we were allowed to go off gold. Going off gold became politically possible because everybody who mattered is perfectly sure that we're not going to do anything with the money, right? We're not going to use that power. So gold became no longer necessary because the elites came to believe or to understand that the threat that gold was protecting them against was no longer necessary. They had already solved that through other means, and so it's no longer necessary to constrain the power of the state over money through the gold standard. Does that make sense? Kind of what I'm saying. So the idea is that what we really need to be thinking about are not the technical. I mean, it's very fun to get into the technical weeds of how money works, but the real problem is not a technical one. The real problem is a political one, and that nothing became possible because of money being severed from its metallic base. It's rather that because they no longer needed that insurance against what they were afraid of, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the English Civil War. And so what I'm really putting on the table is the idea that the problem of money is a problem of political constitution. And I kind of mean constitution in the small c sense. And it's the question about, how power and wealth in society will defend and reproduce themselves. And the fundamental problem that we'll talk about when we get to Greece is that at a certain point, in the late 5th century in the Aegean, there's a trireme revolution. There's a military revolution that required more capital-intensive forms of warfare. And states that did not engage in this kind of warfare would be destroyed by their rivals. They would be unable to supply their external security. And what they needed in order to fund this warfare was a public fiscal system. They needed a state because the cost of war just got too big for individual magnates to be able to fund. It was necessary to create centralized institutions for the collection and disbursement of funds in order to supply the war machine. But the existence of this public fisc, of this centralized taxing and spending system, was an existential threat to the aristocracy, because if one member of the aristocracy could get control of it, then they could tax all their rivals out of existence. And then so this is tyranny, right? This is the idea of tyranny, is the idea of a single ruler who captures the power of the public fisc and uses it to sort of finally win the war against all the other aristocrats, eliminate all the other aristocratic factions, and destroy society, because the point of society is to preserve the dynastic wealth of rich families, right? So the problem is that the public fisc is necessary for protecting dynastic wealth in terms of external security, but it presents an internal security threat because, if you give somebody the power to tax and spend, then they might just tax away everything that you own and distribute it to their followers, right? So they're going to tax your estate. They're going to hand out that money to, they might free your slaves and arm your slaves and pay your slaves with the stuff they stole from your estate, and they will use that in order to overthrow you, right? So so the public fisc is a problem for this reason. And I suggest to you the entire history of Western political thought from ancient Athens to the modern period is very centrally concerned with the question of how to contain the threat of the fisc, which actually can't be dispensed with. It's necessary. It's an existential threat to inequality in society. How do we deal with that? Well, the way that we deal with that is by creating a constitution that will make a difference between the situations that we're allowed to use money for and those that we aren't. And this is the distinction between peace and war, right? Because when it comes to war, money is not a problem. When it comes to peace, all of a sudden, there's no money. Yeah. Okay. So this is money as a constitutional problem. This is what we're going to be exploring. So it's kind of time to wrap up. But anybody have any thoughts? Oh, I will end putting concepts on the table for today. But you can go, or keep talking if you have questions.
Very fascinating, and I'm super excited. Yeah.
Good, great. There's a lot of good stuff.
So what is the just to reiterate, the FISC? How do you spell that? FISC.
FISC. That's right. Okay.
And
if you want, I mean, there's so the reading for this class is pretty light because I designed it for undergraduates. We're going through it twice as fast as they did. If you want more reading, I can give you a lot more. So the thing to read on this is the book by Kantorovich. So I'll spell that out here in the chat. Kantorovich, The King's Two Bodies. So Kantorovich, he has a chapter about the Holy Fisc, So Kantorovich is a very famous book about the problem of sovereignty. So where this discussion leads is the question of sovereignty. So the Chartist theory emphasizes the idea of sovereignty. They talk about monetary sovereignty, and the idea of sovereignty is, in their terms, is that your debts are self-denominated, right? Your debt is just denominated in your own debt, and so it's a kind of tautology, right? That's what it means to be monetary sovereign. Whereas if you're not monetary sovereign, say you are, you're Bolivia, you owe money in dollars, and you don't create the dollars, so you're not sovereign, right? But there is a whole tradition of the problem of sovereignty since Plato in the Western political tradition that they totally ignore. They don't talk about it at all. They use this word and they ignore the problem. And the problem of sovereignty in Western political thought is the problem of whether the sovereign is above or below the law. So whether the king makes the law or whether the king is made by the law. And this matters because it very directly relates to the question of whether the king is allowed to meddle with debts or not, right? If the king is above the law, then he can't be forced to pay his debts. He can say, no, I'm the law, I don't want to pay you, right? If the king is below the law, then he is subject to debts. And so this is a problem that has to be solved in order to create a world in which the debt of the king is the money, you see. So part of what we'll be talking about is the problem of sovereignty and as it relates to constitutional struggles over money, because the problem is that the sovereign has to be contained. So part of what I'm going to suggest to you is that modern money requires a domestication of the king. You have to kind of make the king into a house pet, so you can trot him out when you need him, but then you can keep him safely locked away for most of the time when you want to pretend like money is scarce. Yeah, Valerie.
So I'm just curious, what would be your favorite sort of Western philosophical text to sort of revisit with this very specific interpretation of sovereignty?
Well, you got to be
just like you thought it was like really funny compared to how most other people take it.
Yeah, Plato's Statesman is the place to begin.
Okay.
That's really the classic plays. Shakespeare's Richard II, which is Kantorovich talks about that. I write about this in my dissertation. I mean, so Jean Bodin, who's a late medieval thinker of absolutism, right? He famously says that the king cannot bind himself with his own promises, right? That's the problem of sovereignty. Whether you can, and this, so in Plato's Statesman, there's the problem. Well, what if the lawmaker makes a law and then it turns out to be a bad law? Can you change it? Well, if you say yes, the problem is that this opens up this Pandora's box. I mean, if the ruler can just change the law whenever he says it's not working, I mean, what is that? So what even is law? It's just the whim of the ruler. And if law is just the whim of the ruler, now your property is in danger, right? That's the fundamental problem, because the point of the rule of law is to protect your property against what the state thinks would be good, right? The state thinks it knows what to do with your wealth, and you need to make sure that it can't do it, right? You need to make a limit to what the state is allowed to do with your wealth. Michael.
I just had thought of a question. So you said that one of the hallmarks of like the modern, I guess you might call it liberal monetary like structure, is that it like obfuscates like the different kinds of money. So they're not like totally apparent at the surface, right? It like hides the inherent bimetallism in like different objects, I guess. So it sounds like I don't know. I guess I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, but I don't know if there is. So like, is there a corresponding kind of obfuscation or like covering up of the idea that there are like great, like rich aristocratic families? Because like, at least in the US, like I don't really ever hear anyone talk about it all that much. And like the way we teach like civics and politics in school to kids is that, oh, there are no aristocrats, and that everything gets decided on like voting, and the only thing that matters in politics is democratic institutions, and that it doesn't matter how rich anyone is because you can always count on them to make the decision that's right for everybody, because like, I don't know, maybe utilitarianism or something, but they don't tell you that utilitarianism is like, well, what gets the most utility or exchange value, right? But I don't know, like I'm just wondering, like, where are the aristocratic families? Like, what's the like optics on them? Like, it sounds like you might be able to suggest that there's a kind of like covering up of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I'm not a historian of the modern period, so I mean, this is but I think the problems that I'm going to be, the problems that I'm going to be talking about in older historical, I mean, they're rearranged in interesting ways in the modern period, right? I mean, so one of the problems with, so one of the reasons that the public fisc is a threat is that the guy, whoever controls it, the king, can use that power in order to elevate new men, right? So whether we're talking Henry VIII, Richard II, Pericles, like whoever we're talking about, the problem is that access to the fisc means that new families are going to get wealthy. So you're going to have nouveau riche people who are kind of threatening the order of the aristocrats. What is interesting about the modern period after the French Revolution is that it gets turned on its head, and that's now the legitimating ideology of society, right? So rather than the elevation of new men being a delegitimation for the regime, it's the legitimating ideology. Now, of course, the reality is, well, I think there's two kind of interesting things. I mean, one thing that's happening is that, we're in a situation that is very much in some ways like the late Roman Republic, where we have a few very rich men who have managed to monopolize almost all of the imperial upside, right? So there's all of the profits of empire are going to Bezos and Musk and these people, and now what are they trying to do with it? Well, they're trying to create private economies where they have everything vertically integrated that they control, and from there they can now mount a challenge to the state. So you have the problem of the super rich. But I think in a way, the deeper problem is the problem of white supremacy, which is the problem of mass affluence, right? So we have the problem of dynasties, right? Dynastic wealth at the mass level that is created in the aftermath of World War II. And now the problem is a reproduction crisis in the dynasty. And the political question is whether we are going to allow these mass affluent dynasties to be reduced to a state of poverty, or whether we're going to try to maintain this sort of historically strange 3-class system, right? Where we have these, so I think our politics is
So it's not just a question anymore of like the aristocrats and non-aristocrats. It's a question of like major aristocrats, minor aristocrats, and non-aristocrats.
Yes.
And then like the question is, do we sacrifice the minor aristocrats for the sake of the major aristocrats, or for the minor aristocrats, or for the non-aristocrats? It sounds like, is that kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I would say, I think this problem of dynasty is still very relevant to our politics, but we have to, what does change in the modern period is the phenomenon of mass affluence, which is not something that exists in quite the same way in any of the other periods that we're going to be looking at. I mean, it's not total, in Rome, you have the problem of, you have, there's new men in Rome and all of this, there's plebeian families who are rising to great wealth, and there's men from the provinces who are, but the percentage of the society that we're talking about is a totally different order of magnitude than what we're looking at in American society. So that's my kind of answer to that. Yeah, and I think sort of the question is, to what extent can we maintain this fiction about the meritocratic social mobility, because we ideologically can't admit to ourselves that a few families own everything, whereas in the past that wasn't something that needed to be legitimized. In fact, that was itself a legitimating thing, right? What was delegitimizing was when you start messing with the families. So that's very different about the modern period, and I think it remains to be seen where that goes. Because whether our ruling class can give up the fiction of their own meritocracy, I don't know. We'll see. Just reading the. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have a thought? Question? Okay. All right. I think I'll end the session for today then. Thanks everyone. This has been really interesting. And there's much more cool stuff in store for us. So I will send the readings for next week very shortly, and I'll see you all then.
See ya.